you imagine there's a line this way. See how that distance opens up. See that?
Yeah.
So as if you could measure from that point down here to here, it's the length of that, right? That's the critical kind of point of reference in terms of the loading of that lever. Yeah? Now, so see the way the foot position is there? Now try to do it again, but this time angle your feet out slightly.
Angle it down.
And instead of, as you squat down, try to drive your knees out as far as possible. Okay. So what you'll be looking at is the way that if you can make adjustments like that, you'll be looking at how it changes that distance. And so there are alterations that you can make to technique that are going to do those things, right? So if you're wanting to decrease the loading on that lumbar, what you're looking for is a way to get down that is going to create less pitch. And that's about hip position. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yep. So something like an elevated heel.
The elevated heel tends, because what the elevated heel would tend to make sense, but it's something that you need to work out for yourself. So, in a similar way to what we've talked about with the squat, you need to start experimenting with different lines and different parts and seeing what they can do for you. But the pin press is a really good way of finding some information on what works for you. One of the other reasons I like that kind of wedged path is because I know the closer I get, like I said when you're unracking it, the closer the bar gets to my shoulder line, the stronger I am. That only works at a certain height. If you go too low, you're going to be doing like a tricep extension. But what it means for me is that when I'm benching, if I come off my chest and things get hard, if I'm benching in a straight line and things get hard, what are you going to do?
Go back.
Right? Yeah, that's exactly right. You move towards the stronger leverage position.
But in general, like, isn't that going to be the strongest point, like, where your wrist, elbow, shoulder in line, like?
Normally, yeah, but it all depends on where your elbows are in relation to your wrists, right? So, like, one of the things that, like in the same way that, I said when I was being taught to squat, people used to say to me, sit back, sit back, sit back. One of the other things that in the same gym people used to yell at people was tuck, 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 tuck. Now, one of the things you need to look at straight away when a person's benching is where are their wrists in relation to their elbows. Now, if their elbows shoot away from their wrists, then they're creating a loading through their forearm that is not, you're not strong at all on that.
With board presses and stuff, I see a lot of people who do, I encourage people to, especially particularly at the top, because at lockout, you will be flat, you will be, you will not lock something out like that.
That's
you know
right.
what I mean? I think a lot of people get into the habit of bringing a bar down, tucking, but the reality is when you're pressing or if you're targeting lockout, you will have elbows out. Like, is that right? Like in saying that, like having the elbows.
I think though that there's two things about that. One is that wherever you touch on your chest and wherever you start from, that's going to determine the line that you press in.
Yeah, that's right.
And if your elbows stay with your wrists, that's going to determine how much you tuck. So rather than telling a person to tuck, what you do is you establish what their starting point is, what their touching point is, and just make sure the elbows and the wrists stay together. So as you come down, the more that you move on that plane, the more that you are going to rotate around and tuck.
Yeah.
But that's what determines how much you tuck, not the cue to tuck.
Yeah.
Like, so if you're touching here and you start tucking, you're going to end up doing something like this, and that is not a strong position. And so you're right, you're going to end up like that. The way that the best technical benches around now are the Japanese, but they all learned everything they learned from a group in the States, New York, called Metal Militia. And those guys all got together and they just went nuts on benching. They did these insane 8-hour bench sessions. It was all about technique, let's perfect it. And one of the things that they say when they bench, the cue that they say, when they come off the chest, they say, throw it up, and then they throw their elbows out as they bench. They don't tuck. They go like that, and then when they come up, they throw their elbows out. And it's about, I guess, it's a timing thing. It's a kind of tempo thing like a squat, but it's a totally different kind of way of cueing. But I guess the thing is that wherever your starting point, you work out what your starting point is, work out what your touching point is, and you just keep your elbows and your wrists together.
What would your, well, the way the new guys that come here, I teach them is set up, find out
the angle is actually pretty much 90.
Yeah.
No further, no
Yeah,
in.
yeah.
Because a lot of guys, from Phoenix First, they all start out either close grip, like here, it becomes lockout, so
Yeah.
hard. But then, obviously, if it's wide, they start. A lot of them generally, obviously, flare their elbows out, even on the bottom.
Yeah.
So the way I've had them, they arch, they'll go down. So that's the part where they'll drive the elbows up. The wrists are always perpendicular to the bar to take the pressure off and the part of the roll. But up here, I've had, what's a cue you would use? Because I agree with you there, you come down and they flare out to lock out. Because as Dimmy said, you have to flare to lock out at a certain point, which is like a 3-board or whatever it may be, depending on your leverages. What would your cue be? So if you would coach me from the bottom, what would your cue be from here? And
Well, I think there's two things you probably want to do. One is the pin press thing to kind of work out those points. But the top point will be with elbows out.
Yeah.
The bottom point will probably be with some form of rotation.
Yeah.
So it's more a natural kind of movement to that point, right?
Yeah.
So it's not. I guess I'm not really kind of keen on the idea of forcing elbows in or forcing out. It's about keeping them together, and the amount of rotation will be determined on the angle that the kind of amount of wedge. Now I think you're onto it though, because if you take a person and you put their elbows here, you see, right? That length here takes them to there. There's no point in however they want to bench, they should never be going lower than that to touch, right? But so then it's a matter of, once you line up these angles, see, you've got straight on here, straight on here, that's a pretty good starting point, right?
Yeah.
And so you've got an idea roughly. That's a kind of a starting point you want to work with.
obviously the arch and stuff.
Now the arch thing, there's a number of considerations here. Now one is you need a strong upper back, and you need a tight upper back to save your shoulders, and it reduces range of motion. Now a lot of people have got a lot of views about arching, and the reality is the arching does reduce the range of motion, but that's just a small part of what arching is about, right? One of the key things is that it changes the angle. And one of the things you will know is that if you try declines or dips, you'll know that you recruit much more pec major on that angle. It's a much stronger path, right, than that straight path. So an arch, what it will do is change the angle of the press, and it changes it into a way that you can recruit pec. Especially with a bench, the range of motion issue is a greater factor. But with raw pressing, it's actually the angle in terms of the ways in which it creates a kind of mechanical and muscular advantage. So the arching will rotate the torso in a way that is stronger. It does reduce the range of motion, but it also puts you into a stronger position.
So you should still aim for, so down here, obviously this is flat, but then as soon as you arch, it goes a bit
It does
higher.
two things, right? The shoulder in relation to chest shifts back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it changes the angle that you press on.
So the touching point on the chest would be enough to be high. Typically, yeah. So if they were flat backing when they came in and it was touching here, would you try to always aim for, I've always been...
Rather than worrying about that too much, what I would say is I'll start looking at the movement and start trying to find what looks natural and comfortable, like the shoe. Got to feel good. But one of the things you have to do is you have to work on the strength and tightness through the scapular area. One of the mistakes that I often hear is people, they say, right, you've got to get tight through the back to bench, but what they do is they shrug, and they actually don't create a strong platform, they actually kind of lift up, and it's not protecting their shoulder, it's also not really kind of setting up a strong foundation. So it's actually, rather than like that, it's down and together. And one of the best ways of queuing it up is to get a band like this. Keep the scapula down, pull it tight, and then you get that pull together tight like that, and you actually get a good feeling of what it should feel like in terms of the activation. This is a great exercise to do to build conditioning through the back, band pull aparts. It's also a really good drill to kind of work out whether you're ready for it. Well, this is one of the things we do is you set up like that, pull apart, and then bench and hold that position. It's actually really hard to hold that upper back position while you're doing this. What a lot of people will do is, as they're doing it, they'll pop. The shoulders will pop. Now, if it's going to do it when you're doing the bands like that, chances are when you get under a heavy load, that's exactly what's going to happen. Your shoulders will pop like that.
So yeah,
The way I do it now is based on the way that I've watched the Japanese lifters do it. Basically, the difference is the way that you set up the tension in the back for the arch. Now, in terms of mobility for an arch, for bench, the key points are hip mobility, lower back mobility, and upper back mobility. Now, what you often find with people that first start benching and they start trying to arch is they crank everything through the lower back, and it's really hard on your back. What you need to do is you need to get really, for people that start, you want to start focusing on the hips. Because if you think about it, like when you're setting up the lower part of the arch, you can either just arch the crap out of your back, but if you actually set your hips up right, it actually takes a lot of that tension out of the lower back and you achieve the same thing. But the upper back arch is the real tricky bit. And that's about mobilising the upper thoracic area and actually getting that ability to rotate and push up through it. Now, I'm not that great, but I've been working on it for a while and I'm getting better at it. But, so the less crazy version of the arch setup is, as I said, the Japanese version. And that's where you get up on the bench. You lift your chest to the point that you want to hold it. This is where I want my chest to be. Then you grip the bar. Then the idea is to try to hold that position. So for me, it's heels down. You can be up on your toes, it doesn't really matter. Just affects the stability. And then so I'm trying to hold that position. Now I start, because I wedged, so I'm tightening up through my back. I'll start high and then wedge down. That makes sense, yeah? The crazy version, the metal militia guys, they're insane. They crank the back up really crazy. The reason I don't do this is because I do 3 lift. And if I do this, there's a good chance I won't deadlift. But they go through. Then they set the legs up.
Oh, that's like how I do it.
You're crazy.
That's how I
That's how I do it as well.
You're all crazy. You're all crazy.
I do it because like the stronger girls in GPC all do it like that way. They get a
That's
massive arch and
That's
they're
the
strong.
motion. You're cranking up.
I'll do that.
Yeah.
That's the way I've been teaching.
What you're doing is you're creating so much tension through the lower back.
Yeah.
I get cramps in my hips though.
But the way that you take the tension off the lower back is through your hips. Right, so the more you can get your legs back in here, and there you go. So that's what you want. See, I've got pretty lousy hip mobility.
So you do want your legs back?
Well,
Because I used to have my